I raised my husband's 2 children for 20 years. At his funeral, his family told me I was not really their mother. At my husband's funeral, I was seated in the third row. Not the front, the third. I found out where I was sitting when I arrived. Because the order of service had been arranged without me by his sister, and his late first wife's mother, and there was a printed card on each seat with a name on it, and mine was in the third row. Behind a row of cousins I had met perhaps 4 times, and in the front row, in the seats reserved for immediate family, sat my 2 children, the 2 children I had raised since they were 6 and 4. I had fed and clothed and sat up with and taught to read and driven to every appointment of their lives, and between them in the center seat, the seat of the chief mourner, sat a woman I had not seen in 19 years, their birth mother, who had walked out when they were 4 and 6 and sent a birthday card, sporadically for a few years, and then nothing, who had reappeared 11 days after my husband died, weeping, in black, and been installed by the family in the seat that should have been mine, at the funeral of the man whose children I raised because she would not. And when I tried, quietly, to move forward, to sit with the children I had mothered for 20 years, my husband's sister put her hand on my arm and said, very gently, in the voice you use with someone who has misunderstood the situation, Fenella, the front row is for family. You understand. Let me back up. My name is Fenella Damicross. I'm 58 years old and I raised 2 children who were not born to me from the ages of 6 and 4 until they were grown and when their father died. His family and their birth mother spent about 4 months attempting to erase the fact that I had ever been their mother at all, and very nearly succeeded because the law and the machinery of death and the ancient stupid magic of the word blood were all. First on their side, I want to say the thing at the start that this whole story is about, because it is the thing that was stolen from me, and it was not money, though money came into it. What they tried to take was not an inheritance. It was a relationship. They tried to make it so that 20 years of motherhood had never happened, that I had been all along a sort of long-term staff member, and that the moment the man who employed me died, my connection to his children evaporated. Because it had never been real because I was not blood. And the terrible thing, the thing that nearly worked, is that they were partly right in law. Because a stepmother, however total, however lifelong, has almost no legal status in relation to the children she raises. Blood has a claim. Marriage to their father has a claim. 20 years of being the only mother 2 human beings have known has, in itself, in law, almost none. It took me those 4 months, a box of school records, a solicitor who understood property, and finally my own daughter standing up in a room and refusing to be told who her mother was, to establish something that should never have needed establishing. Let me tell you how I became their mother, because the beginning explains everything the birth mother's family later tried to deny. I met Adrian when I was 37. He was a widower. I was told at first, that's how he described it, and I understood why later. His wife had left, not died, left. She had walked out of the family home when their daughter Imogen was 6 and their son Rufus was 4, in circumstances I will not detail because they are the children's to tell, and had gone, and the leaving had been total. No custody arrangement she honored, no maintenance. A birthday card for the first 2 or 3 years, decreasingly, and then, by the time I met Adrian, nothing at all for over a year. Adrian was raising 2 small, frightened, bewildered children alone, badly, because he was a grieving, abandoned man working full-time and doing his best and drowning. And I came into that. I want to be honest about what I walked into, because the family later liked to imply I had married a comfortable widower and enjoyed a ready-made family. I married a devastated man and 2 traumatized children, one of whom did not speak to me for 4 months, and one of whom would not sleep unless someone sat on the floor by the bed. I married school runs and packed lunches and a little boy who wet the bed until he was 9 because his mother had left, and no amount of love from me could fully fix that, though God knows I tried. We married when Imogen was 7 and Rufus was 5. And from that day, from that exact day, I was their mother. Not their stepmother in any sense that mattered to the running of a life. Their mother. I did all of it for 20 years. Let me tell you what all of it means, because the birth mother's family spent 4 months trying to reduce it to a word, and I will not have it reduced. I was the one at every parent's evening, for both children, for the whole of their schooling. Every single one. I have the diaries. When the school needed a parent, I was the parent. When Rufus broke his arm at 8, I was the one in A and E. When Imogen started her periods at 11, I was the one she came to, and I was the one who explained it, and I was the one she cried with. When Rufus was bullied at 13, I was the one who went to the school. When Imogen didn't get into the 6th form she wanted, I was the one who sat on her bedroom floor at midnight. I taught Imogen to drive. I taught Rufus to cook the 3 things he can cook. I sat up the night before both of their GCSEs. I was in the audience at every play, every concert, every sports day for 2 children for over a decade, and their birth mother was not at a single one, because she did not know they existed, because she had chosen not to. And here's the thing that matters most, the thing the family could never take away no matter how they tried. They called me Mum, not immediately. Imogen took about 2 years, and it happened by accident first, and then on purpose. Rufus, who barely remembered his birth mother, called me Mum from about the age of 6 and never called me anything else. For 20 years, in that house, at those schools, in those hospitals, to every doctor and teacher and friend's parent, I was these 2 children's mother, because motherhood is a thing you do, not a thing you are assigned by biology. Adrian and I did not have children of our own. That was a choice, and it was partly a choice about Imogen and Rufus, that they should never, ever feel there were the real children in them. There were only ever them. They were my children. I have no others, and I wanted no others, and I do not, even now, after everything, regret that for 1 second. Let me give you a few specific things, because she raised them is a phrase, and the phrase is exactly what the family tried to hide behind, and specifics are the only defense against a phrase. The 4 months Imogen didn't speak to me. I want that on the record, because it is the opposite of the ready-made family story. When I married Adrian and moved in, Imogen, 7 years old, and clever and wounded, decided I was the enemy, the woman who had replaced her mother, and she did not say a single word to me for 4 months. Not one. She would communicate through Rufus, or through her father, or through pointing. And I did not force it, and I did not take it personally, though it broke my heart daily. I made her packed lunch every morning and laid out her clothes and drove her to school in silence for 4 months. And then one morning out of nowhere she said, "Can I have the red cup?" And that was the beginning. It took 4 months of being rejected by a 7-year-old to earn the right to be asked for the red cup. That is where motherhood starts, not at a birth, at a red cup in month 5 after being hated. The bedwetting. Rufus wet the bed until he was 9. Because his mother had left and his small body was holding a grief, couldn't name, and every night for 3 years I changed sheets at 2 and 3 in the morning, and never once let him feel it was a burden and told him every single time that it was fine that it happened, that I'd sort it, that he should go back to sleep. 3 years of nighttime sheets. Deanne changed, across her children's entire lives, 0 sheets. And the day Imogen got her first period at 11 at school. Rang home terrified, and I left work and drove to that school and took her home and sat with her, and explained everything and made her tea, and told her it was wonderful and normal, and that her body was doing exactly what it should. That is a day a girl remembers her whole life, the day and the person. For Imogen, that person is me. Deanne was, that day, somewhere I did not know, having not contacted her daughter in 7 years. I could give you 500 of these. That is the point. Motherhood is not one grand fact. It is 500 or 5,000 small ones, each of which I was present for and the birth mother was not, and which together are the only thing that mother has ever actually meant. Let me tell you the one thing we did not do, because it is the hinge of the entire tragedy. Adrian never adopted them. I never adopted them. I could have. Step-parent can apply to adopt a stepchild, and it would have made me, in law, their mother, permanently, unassailably, with every right that blood confers. We talked about it. Twice. Once when Imogen was about 10 and once when she was 14. Both times we decided against it, and our reasons were, at the time, good ones, and they are the reasons that destroyed me. The first reason was that adoption would have required, in practice, dealing with the birth mother, locating her, involving her in a legal process, potentially reawakening a relationship the children had painfully moved past. And Adrian could not face it, and more importantly, the children were settled, and the idea of dragging their absent mother back into their lives through a courtroom, to formalize something that already felt completely real, seemed cruel and unnecessary. Why put Imogen through that? We said, to make official a thing that is already true. The second reason was that it felt, honestly, like it didn't matter. I was their mother. Everyone knew I was their mother. The children knew, the school knew, the family, I thought, knew. A piece of paper felt like an insult to a relationship that was already total. Adopting them would have been, in our minds, like a happily married couple of 15 years, suddenly deciding they needed to prove they loved each other. The bond was the fact. The paperwork was, we thought, a formality we didn't need. We did not need it. For 20 years, we did not need it, not for one single day. We needed it for exactly one day, the day Adrian died, and by then it was too late. I have thought about that decision more than any other. And I want to say something to anyone who is where I was, a step-parent raising a child who feels entirely unquestionably yours, because the reasoning that felt so wise to us is a trap, and I did not see it. And I want someone else to see it. The argument against adopting always sounds like the loving argument. It sounds like, our bond is so real that we don't need paper. It sounds like, making it legal would be treating something sacred as a transaction. It sounds like, why put the child through a court process to prove a thing that is already completely true? And every word of that is emotionally correct and legally catastrophic, because the paper is not for the good days. On the good days, on 20 years of good days, the paper is meaningless, an unused certificate in a drawer. The paper is for the one day the relationship is attacked. It is for the day someone with a competing claim arrives and says, you were never really the parent. And on that day, the bond you spent 20 years building counts for almost nothing, and the paper you thought you didn't need counts for everything. I had a total, unquestioned, 20-year motherhood and no paper. Deanne had 19 years of absence and a birth certificate. And when the two claims collided, the birth certificate won the opening rounds, because a birth certificate is paper, and my 20 years were not. If I had adopted Imogen and Rufus when we discussed it, if I had endured the awkwardness of involving Deanne, the discomfort of a court process, the strange feeling of formalizing something that already felt complete, then, when Adrian died, I would have been in law. Exactly what I was in life, their mother unassailably with every right blood confers. Deanne could have wept in every seat in the church, and it would have changed nothing, because the law would have said what the truth said. We didn't do it because it felt unnecessary, and it was unnecessary for 20 years, right up until the single day it was the only thing that would have mattered. We needed it for exactly one day, the day Adrian died, and by then it was too late. Adrian died of a heart attack at 61 at home on a Sunday, and I was there, and I will not describe it. The children were 26 and 24 by then. Imogen lived nearby, Rufus was in Manchester. They came. And for about 10 days, the 3 of us grieved together as a family, which is what we were. And then, on about the 11th day, the birth mother's family arrived. I want to explain how it happened, because it did not feel like an attack at first. It felt like people being kind. Adrian's sister, Celia, had always been civil to me but never warm, and she had never, I now realize, fully accepted the marriage. And Celia took charge of the funeral. To take the burden off you, Fenella, you've got enough to cope with. And I let her because I was destroyed, and because it seemed generous. And through Celia, somehow, I still do not fully know the mechanism, the birth mother was contacted. Her name was Deanne. And Deanne, who had not seen her children in 19 years, who had sent nothing and asked nothing, appeared. And the family's framing of her appearance was extraordinary, and it worked because grief makes people want simple, redemptive stories. Their real mother has come back for them in their hour of need. And within about a week, a new version of the family had assembled itself, and I was not in it. Deanne was the children's mother, their real mother, their blood, returned. Celia was the grieving sister. The birth mother's own mother, a woman named Pauline, the children's biological grandmother, who they had not seen since they were tiny, was suddenly a central figure, weeping in the front room, being brought cups of tea. And I was, in this new configuration, Adrian's widow. Which is true, but only Adrian's widow, his second wife, the stepmother, a person whose relationship to the children was, in the new telling, a legal technicality that had ended with Adrian's death. The funeral was arranged around Deanne, and I was in the third row. I want to describe the mechanism of the erasure, because it was not done with cruelty, and that is what made it so effective. Every step was framed as kindness or as respect for the dead. It began with the arrangements being taken off my hands. Celia rang the funeral director. Celia chose the readings. Celia and Pauline drew up the order of service. And each time it was presented as sparing me. You've got enough to deal with, Fenella. Let us carry this. And because I was in the worst grief of my life, and because refusing help at a funeral makes you look controlling, I let each piece go. And each piece I let go was a piece of my place at my own husband's funeral being handed to the birth mother's family. Then came the language. In the space of about 10 days. I stopped being referred to as Adrian's wife and started being referred to as Adrian's widow, which sounds like the same thing and is not. Widow is a status that ends a marriage, and they use it subtly to place me in the past tense. And Deanne, who had been absent for 19 years, was referred to more and more simply as the children's mother, with no qualifier, no birth, no first, just their mother, while I became their stepmother. A word that had never once been used in 20 years of our actual life, and now appeared in every sentence. And then the seating, which I did not know about until I arrived and found the printed cards. Front row, Deanne in the center, the seat of the chief mourner, flanked by my children. Then Pauline, the returned grandmother. Then Celia. And me, Adrian's wife of 20 years, the woman who had shared his bed and his home and his children for 2 decades, 3 rows back, among people I barely knew. I sat in that third row through the whole service, watching the back of the head of the woman who had abandoned my children, sitting in the seat that was mine, at the funeral of my husband, being handed tissues by my son. And I said nothing, because to stand up and make a scene at Adrian's funeral was unthinkable, and they knew it was unthinkable. And that is precisely why the funeral was the moment they chose to establish the new order. Grief is a very good time to steal something, because the person you are stealing from cannot afford to fight you at a graveside. The funeral was arranged around Deanne, and I was in the third row. Let me tell you about the estate, because this is where the emotional erasure became a financial one. Adrian and I had lived for 20 years in a house. It had been Adrian's house, bought during his first marriage, actually, which mattered later. And Adrian, being a man who assumed he had decades left, had a will that was 12 years out of date. Left my estate to be divided between my children Imogen and Rufus, with a life interest to me in the house, meaning I could live there until I died, but I would not own it. That was the will of a man who trusted that his family would look after his wife. It was written in a world where everyone behaved decently. But there was worse, and it was the thing Celia and Deanne seized on. Because Adrian had made me a beneficiary of certain things, and left me the life interest, but the bulk of the estate, the house's ownership, the value was going to the children. And the children were being told gently, insistently, by Deanne and Celia and Pauline, that Fenella was not really family, that the house was really theirs, that a life interest for a stepmother who might live another 30 years was locking up their inheritance. And that the fair and natural thing would be for me to move out and let them have what was theirs. Let the children have their inheritance. That was the phrase. And it positioned me perfectly as an interloper, a second wife, occupying a house that belonged by blood to the children, greedily insisting on a life interest that deprived them. The fact that I was the only mother those children had known for 20 years. The fact that it was my home, too, that I had lived every day of 2 decades in it, had raised them in it. None of that had weight because I was not blood, and the house was Adrian's, and Adrian's blood was the children, and I was the word again, the stepmother. 6 weeks after the funeral, there was a family meeting about the estate, and I made my stand, and it was a catastrophe. I said, and I was right, and it destroyed me, I said, I am their mother. I have been their mother for 20 years. This is my home. I raised these children. You cannot come back after 19 years and tell me I am not family. I said it to Deanne's face. And Deanne, who is not stupid, did not argue. She wept. She said she understood I was upset. She said she had never wanted to hurt me, that she was only here for her children, that she knew she had made mistakes but that a mother's love never dies, and that she was so grateful to me for helping raise them when she couldn't be there. Helping raise them. 20 years reduced to help, and Celia said the thing that turned the room. She said, Fenella, nobody is denying you cared for them, but you have to see how this looks. Adrian's barely gone, and you're claiming his house and pushing back against his own children's inheritance. These are his children, his blood, and you, forgive me, you're his second wife. think you need to be very careful about being seen to put yourself above his own flesh and blood at a time like this. And the worst of it, the part that silenced me, is that Imogen and Rufus were in the room, and they said nothing. They looked at the floor. Because they were 26 and 24 and drowning in grief and being pulled apart by two competing mothers and a whole family telling them that blood was blood, and they did not have in that moment the strength to stand up to a room full of adults and declare which woman was their mother. And their silence was taken as agreement. See, even the children are uncomfortable. See how she's making this about herself. I left that meeting having confirmed the family's entire narrative. The grasping stepmother, making a dead man's funeral about a house, upsetting his poor children and his poor returned wife. I had walked in to assert that I was their mother, and walked out having provided the evidence that I was an interloper. I saw a solicitor, and she gave me the worst afternoon, and it was worse than I expected because it was worse in a way I had not even known to fear. Her name was Yewand Akaffer, and she did private client work, and she went through it. She said, I have to explain some things that are going to be very hard to hear. First, on the children. In law, you have no parental relationship with Imogen and Rufus. You did not adopt them. Step-parent who is not adopted has no automatic legal status as a parent, regardless of how long or how completely they have parented. They are adults now, so this matters less practically, but I mention it because the family's claim that you are not their mother is, in the narrowest legal sense, correct, and you need to know that so it doesn't ambush you. Second, on the estate. Your husband's will gives you a life interest in the house, not ownership. That is worth a great deal. It means you cannot simply be evicted, whatever they say. But it also means the children own the house subject to your right to occupy, and there will be enormous pressure on you to surrender that interest for a cash sum, and the family will frame your refusal as greed. Third, and this is the one that matters. She paused. Whose name is on the deeds? Because you keep saying it was Adrian's house. I need to know exactly how it was owned. And I said I didn't know. It had been Adrian's from his first marriage. I assumed it was in his name. And Yewand said, find out. Before we do anything else, find out. Because if that house was ever put into joint names, if at any point in 20 years you and Adrian owned it as joint tenants, then it does not form part of his estate at all. It passes to you automatically, outside the will, by survivorship, and the children and Deanne and Celia have no claim to it whatsoever. So before you accept that you have a life interest in the children's house, I need you to establish, as a fact, that it is the children's house. That was the false victory in reverse. I had come in believing I had a life interest and might lose my home, and I left not knowing whether I owned it outright, and no one had noticed. Weeks between that appointment and getting the title were among the strangest of the whole ordeal, because I was living in a house whose ownership I did not know. I'm told daily by an entire family that it belonged to my children, and I was occupying it against their interests. And I want to describe what the erasure felt like in those weeks, day to day, because the funeral was one event, and the campaign that followed was a slow, grinding thing that wore at me in a way I was not prepared for. It was the phone calls I stopped being included in. Decisions about Adrian's affairs, his memorial, the scattering of his ashes, arranged in a group I was not part of, communicated to me afterward as a courtesy, if at all. It was Pauline, the returned grandmother, referring to the family in a way that pointedly did not include me. The family feels. The family would prefer, until I understood that I had been redefined out of the word. It was the children being, without quite meaning to, pulled away. Deanne took Imogen for lunches. Deanne wanted to make up for lost time. And I could not object without looking like I was trying to keep a mother from her children, the very framing that trapped me everywhere. And so I watched in those weeks. The two people I loved most in the world being courted by the woman who had abandoned them, while I was recast as the obstacle to their reunion. And it was the specific loneliness of grieving my husband while simultaneously fighting for the right to be considered his wife. I had lost Adrian. That alone should have been the whole of it. Instead, I had to grieve him while a committee of people decided, around me and above me, that my 20 years with him had been a kind of long-term arrangement that ended with his death. I was mourning a marriage that the people around me were busy retroactively downgrading into a job. I did not know, in those weeks, that I owned the house. I did not know that the entire premise of their campaign was already false, had been false since the moment Adrian died, and that a document 3 pounds and 1 day away would undo all of it. I only knew that I was being slowly deleted from my own life, and that I did not have the strength in that grief to stop it. That was the false victory in reverse. ACT 3, the deeds, the records, and IMOGN. 3 things saved me, and I want to take them in order because the order matters. The first was the deeds. I got the title from the land registry. It costs 3 pounds and takes a day, which is a thing more people should know. And I sat at my kitchen table and read it. And the house was owned by Adrian Cross and Fenella Damie Cross as joint tenants. Because, and I had genuinely forgotten this, it had seemed so administrative at the time, in 2011. When Adrian remortgaged to pay for the loft conversion, the bank had required the mortgage to be in both our names, and the solicitor doing it had, as a matter of routine, transferred the property into joint names at the same time, as joint tenants. Which is the default, and which almost nobody understands the significance of. Joint tenancy means that when one owner dies, the property passes automatically and entirely to the survivor. It does not go into the estate. It is not governed by the will. It is not subject to any life interest, any division, any claim by children or blood or anyone. The house was mine. Wholly, immediately, unarguably mine, and had been the moment Adrian died, and the will's provision of a life interest to me in the house was meaningless. Because Adrian could not leave in his will a house that was no longer his to leave. It had passed to me the instant his heart stopped by a piece of property law from centuries ago. Deanne and Celia had spent 6 weeks telling the children that I was locking up their house. It had never been their house. It had been mine since the 11th of the month, and no one in that family had thought to check. Because they were all so certain that blood decided everything that it did not occur to them that a mortgage clerk in 2011 had already decided in my favor forever. The second was the records, because winning the house was not enough. Keeping the house did not make me their mother, and the thing I could not bear more than the house, more than the money, was the family's assertion that I had never really been their mother at all. That I had been, in Deanne's phrase, help. And so I built the record. Not for a court, there was no court claim to be had about motherhood. I built it for the children, and for myself, 20 years of it. Every parent's evening record with my name in the parent field. The school's emergency contact forms, listing me, from 2005 to 2018, as mother. The GP records, I was registered as the person with parental responsibility for both children's medical care throughout. The letters from schools, always to Mrs. Cross, Rufus's mother. Imogen's university application, in which, in her personal statement, age 17, she had written about my mum, who isn't my birth mother but who has been my mother in every way that counts since I was 6. She had written that, at 17, for UCAS. It was in the file, and the photographs, 20 years of them, me at every event, every Christmas, every holiday, every birthday. A visual record, undeniable, of a woman being a mother to 2 children across 2 decades, in which the birth mother appears exactly 0 times. I did not build this to prove anything to judge. I built it because the family was rewriting history, and I needed the history to exist in a form that could not be rewritten. I needed it to be true on paper, because they were making it false in the room. I want to describe the night I built it, because it was one of the hardest and most important nights of my life, and because I think anyone whose relationship has been denied will understand exactly why I needed to do it. I got everything out, 20 years of it, from lofts and drawers and boxes, and I laid it across the dining table and the floor, and I went through it chronologically from the first parent's evening slip, when Imogen was 7, to Rufus's university graduation. And I built a timeline of my own motherhood in documents, and about halfway through, I understood that I was not doing it for the family, or for a court, or even really as evidence. I was doing it for myself. Because the campaign had been so relentless and so total that I had begun. This is the frightening thing, and it is what these situations do. I had begun to doubt it myself. Weeks of being called stepmother, of being placed in 3rd rows and excluded from the family, of hearing Deanne called their mother, had started to erode my own certainty. Some cold hour of the night, I had actually asked myself, was I their mother? Or was I, as they kept implying, a woman who had helped, who had overinvested, who had mistaken a caretaking role for a bond? And laying out those 20 years, document by document, answered it. Because there it was, undeniable, in the school's handwriting, and the doctor's records, and my daughter's own 17-year-old UCAS statement. I was their mother. Not in my feelings, which could be doubted, but in the entire documentary record of 2 human lives. Every institution that had ever dealt with those children had recorded me as their mother, for 20 years, because I was the one who was there. I needed to see that laid out, because the gaslighting had reached the point where I needed proof to believe my own life. That is what a campaign like this does. It does not just deny you to others. It makes you doubt yourself until you have to assemble the evidence of your own motherhood on a dining table at 3 a.m. to remind yourself that it was real. It was real. The table proved it. And once I had proved it to myself, I stopped being movable. I did not build this to prove anything to judge. I built it because the family was rewriting history, and I needed the history to exist in a form that could not be rewritten. I needed it to be true on paper, because they were making it false in the room. The third was Imogen. And this is the part that matters more than the house and more than the records, because the children were the actual territory being fought over, and the children were the only ones who could truly end it. Imogen came to my house about 2 months in. On her own, without telling Deanne, which I understood the significance of, and she sat at my kitchen table, the table where I had helped her with homework for 12 years, and she was shaking, and she said, "Mum, I need to say something and I need you to let me get through it." She called me Mum. After 2 months of the family's campaign, sitting at my table, she called me Mum, and I had to grip the edge of the table. And she said, "I've been a coward. I've let them do this because I couldn't cope with the fighting on top of losing Dad. And I let Deanne sit in the front row, and I let them put you in the 3rd row, and I have hated myself every single day since." She was crying. "You are my mother. Deanne gave birth to me, and then she left when I was 6, and I don't remember her, and I don't want to. You are the one who raised me. You were the one I called when I failed my driving test, and when Marcus dumped me, and when I got the job. You, not her. And I let a room full of people who weren't there for any of it tell me otherwise because I was too broken to argue, and I'm not doing it anymore." And she said the thing that ended the whole war. She said, "Rufus feels the same. We talked. We're not doing this. We're going to tell them." I want to say something about why the children's silence had lasted as long as it did, because it would be easy to hear the story and think they abandoned me for 2 months, and that is not what happened, and understanding it is important. They were 26 and 24, and they had just lost their father, the one parent who had been constant their whole lives. And into that rawest possible wound walked a whole apparatus of adults, an aunt, a grandmother, and a birth mother, all speaking with the authority of age and blood and grief, all telling them a simple, powerful story. Your real mother has come back. Blood is blood. This is the natural order. And the woman you called Mum is when you think about it clearly. Or stepmother, that is an enormously heavy thing to push back against when you are young and shattered. It is not that they believed it. Imogen told me later that she never believed it for a second. It is that they did not have, in the worst weeks of their grief, the strength to stand in a room full of forceful adults and fight. Silence was not agreement. Silence was exhaustion. Silence was two grieving young people who could not yet find the strength to do the thing that would later cost them their aunt and their grandmother and their birth mother all at once. What changed was simply that the shock wore off enough for the anger to arrive. Imogen said the turning point for her was the third row. She said she kept thinking about me sitting behind her at the funeral, and about the fact that she had let it happen, and that the shame of it grew until it became larger than her fear of the fight. She said, I couldn't be someone who let my mum sit in the third row at my dad's funeral. I couldn't be that person, so I had to become the person who fixed it. They didn't abandon me. They were ambushed in grief by a coordinated adult campaign, and it took them 2 months to find their feet, and the moment they found them, they came straight back, and they came back fighting. And she said the thing that ended the whole war. She said, Rufus feels the same. We talked. We're not doing this. We're going to tell them. The reckoning was not legal because it did not need to be. The house was mine by survivorship. That was simply a fact, established, unarguable, and once Ewan's letter made it clear that the property had never formed part of Adrian's estate, the entire financial premise of the family's campaign, that I was occupying the children's inheritance, evaporated. There was no inheritance to occupy. The house had never been theirs, but the reckoning that mattered happened in a room, and it was Imogen and Rufus who delivered it. There was a gathering, ostensibly about the headstone. Deanne was there, established now as the mother, and Celia and Pauline. And at some point, Deanne said something about the children needing to think about their future and their inheritance and what was fair. And Rufus, who is quiet, who barely remembers a time before me, who had said almost nothing through the whole ordeal, stood up and said, Stop! Stop calling us your children. You're not our mum. You gave birth to us and then you left and you didn't come back for 19 years and you came back for a funeral. That's not a mum. That's a stranger who's sad. And Imogen said, Our mum is Fenella. She's been our mum since I was 6. She was at everything. You were at nothing. And we're not going to sit here and let you rewrite 20 years because you turned up in black and cried in the right seat. And Deanne said something about carrying them, giving birth to them, a mother's bond. And Rufus said the thing I will remember until I die. He said, You gave birth to us. Fenella raised us. Those aren't the same thing, and we know which one is our mother because we're the ones it happened to. Not you, not Auntie Celia, us. And we say it's her. We're the ones it happened to, and we say it's her. The room was silent, and Celia tried to say something about blood, and Imogen said, Don't you dare say blood to me. You weren't there either. And that was the end of it. There's no arguing with the children when the children speak, because the children are the only ones with actual standing to say who their mother is, and they said it. Deanne left the area within a few months, and I have not heard of her since. I bear her, strangely, less anger than I bear Celia. Deanne at least had the excuse of being a genuinely damaged person who had made a catastrophe of her life. Celia had no excuse. Celia knew me for 20 years, knew exactly what I was to those children, and chose, the moment her brother died, to side with blood against the truth, because the truth was inconvenient and blood was simple. Celia and I do not speak. She maintains, I am told, that she was only trying to do right by the children and by her brother's memory, and that I made it into battle. I made nothing into battle. I sat in the third row until my children pulled me into the front. I have thought a great deal about Celia, because she is the one who genuinely puzzles me, and I have landed somewhere I want to share, because I think it explains a whole category of these betrayals. Celia did not gain anything. That is the thing people find hard to understand. She was not going to inherit the house. She had no financial stake in erasing me. Deanne at least had a motive I could name, a returning mother reclaiming a role, however unearned. But Celia's campaign against me served no interest of hers at all. So why did she do it? I think the answer is that blood offered her a simpler world, and simpler worlds are comfortable, and comfort is a powerful motive that we underrate. If I was really the children's mother, then Celia had spent 20 years being slightly cold to the woman who was raising her niece and nephew, and had never quite accepted her, and had been, in a small way, wrong for 2 decades. But if I was just the stepmother, then Celia's coldness had been correct all along, appropriate reserve toward an outsider, and the return of the real mother vindicate her. Blood didn't just simplify the situation. It retroactively justified 20 years of Celia never having fully let me in. That is why she couldn't concede, even when the children spoke, even when it cost her the relationship with them. Because conceding didn't just mean admitting she was wrong about the house. It meant admitting she had been wrong about me for 20 years, and had been cold to a good woman for no reason. And that is a thing very few people can say to themselves. It was cheaper for Celia to lose her niece and nephew than to accept that she had misjudged me since the day I married her brother. Celia and I do not speak. She maintains, I am told, that she was only trying to do right by the children and by her brother's memory, and that I made it into battle. I made nothing into battle. I sat in the third row until my children pulled me into the front. The house is mine, and Imogen and Rufus were, of course, right that they had lost an inheritance in the technical sense. The house that would eventually have passed to them under the will now belongs outright to me. And I want to tell you what the two of them did about that, because it is the whole answer to everyone who said blood is blood. They were glad, both of them. Imogen said, It's your home. It was always your home. Dad would be horrified that anyone tried to move you out of it. It comes to us eventually anyway, when you know. And in the meantime, it's yours, and that's exactly right. I have made a new will leaving everything to the two of them. Because they are my children, and there is no one else, and there never will be. And the house they were told was being stolen from them will come to them in the end from their mother, which is how it should always have gone. I want to say a little more about the house, because the way it resolved is the part I am proudest of, and it says everything about the difference between blood and family. When Yuan's letter established that the house had passed to me by survivorship, that it had never been part of Adrian's estate, and that Imogen and Rufus had in the strict sense lost the inheritance the will would have given them, I braced for it to damage things with the children, because the family's whole campaign had been built on that inheritance. It had been cast for months as the woman stealing the children's house, and now, in cold legal fact, the children genuinely would not inherit that house on their father's death. It was mine. The thing I'd been accused of had, in a sense, come true, just by operation of law rather than by any act of mine. And I sat Imogen and Rufus down and explained it to them properly, honestly, both of them. I told them that I understood if they felt something about it, and that I would not hold it against them, and that Adrian's will had intended them to have that house, and the law had cut across it. And Rufus said, "Mum, why are you even worried about this? It's your house. You live there. Where would you go? It's obviously yours." And Imogen said, "Dad would be spinning in his grave that anyone even suggested moving you out of it. It comes to us one day anyway. In the meantime, it's yours, and that's how it should be, and honestly I'm glad it's legally cert now so nobody can ever try that again." They were glad the accident of law had made my home unassailably mine. People who shared no blood with the house's history, but who I had raised in it wanted me to have it. The people who shared blood, but had abandoned it wanted to take it. That is the whole distinction between family and blood, in one contrast, and my children were on the right side of it without having to think about it for a second. Rufus calls every Sunday. Imogen had a baby last year, my grandchild. I will fight anyone who puts an asterisk on that word. And I was in the waiting room, and I was the second person to hold her, and Imogen said, "Say hello to your granny," and I had to leave the room for a minute. Rufus came and found me in the corridor and put his arm around me and said nothing because he understood. Here's the last thing. Tried to steal a relationship, and they nearly succeeded, and the reason they nearly succeeded is that our whole culture, and quite a lot of our law, still believes that blood is the thing that makes a mother. It isn't. I know it isn't because I did it. Motherhood is 20 years of parents' evenings, and midnight driving lessons, and A and E waiting rooms, and periods and heartbreaks, and packed lunches, and being the one who's there. It is a thing you do, 10,000 times, across 2 decades. It is not a thing that is conferred by a birth you were present at and then walked away from. Deanne gave birth to my children. I raised them. Those are not the same thing. And Rufus, at 24, in a room full of adults trying to tell him otherwise, understood the difference better than any of them because, as he said, he was the one it happened to. What saved me legally was a mortgage clerk in 2011 who transferred a house into joint names as a matter of routine, defeating the whole blood claim with a piece of property law nobody in that family understood. That's what kept my home. I will not pretend the law was on the side of motherhood. It wasn't, particularly. It was on the side of a technicality that happened to fall my way, and if that remortgage had never happened, I might have lost the house, and that should frighten anyone in my position, because it means the law would not have protected 20 years of mothering. Only the accident of a joint tenancy did. But what saved the thing that actually mattered, the relationship, the truth that I was their mother, was not the law and was not the house and was not the records, useful as they all were. It was that the children grew up and remembered who was there and said so. The family said blood is blood, and my son stood up in a room and said, "We're the ones it happened to, and we say it's her." There is no deed, no will, no birth certificate, and no returning mother in black that outranks that sentence. I raised them. They know it. They said it. I was in the 3rd row for about 2 months. I have been in the front row of their lives for 24 years, and I always will be, and no one who wasn't there gets a vote.